What up guys, SuperMetal983 here bringing us another album review, and this time we've got some deathcore for you to check out today and from the icons themselves. But yeah, I'm going to be reviewing the new album from the band Suicide Silence entitled Remember You Must Die. This is out now via Century Media Records. Now, Suicide Silence are quite a well-known name in the deathcore genre and are one of the, I personally would say, pioneers of the genre and one of the big titans, you could say. They're up there with the likes of Wyattxhim, Thy Art Is Murder, amongst others, as being like the bands that really established the genre and really pushed it into the mainstream sort of light, you could say. And I'm not gonna lie, I've been a fan of this band for quite a few years, and they were one of the first deathcore bands that I first got introduced to. I mean, back in the day, I remember hearing No Pity for a Coward, the like pre-production sort of version that they released a music video for back in the day. Falling in love with that, and then becoming a fan for many, many years, and then obviously the passing of Mitch. And throughout their new sort of reign with Eddie Hamida, formerly of All Shall Perish, on vocals. But that's where it starts to get a little bit weird for a lot of people, including myself, because back in 2014 they released their first album with Eddie, which was called You Can't Stop Me, which is this one right here, which has the, you know, actual cover inside. But yeah, this album, to me, a lot of people had different opinions on it, and in my opinion, I personally at the time absolutely loved it. I thought personally it was better than The Black Crown, and I listened to it way more than even The Cleansing or No Time to Bleed. And I still listen to this album from time to time. It has got some mint songs like Inherit the Crown, Cease to Exist, You Can't Stop Me, Sacred Words, the re-recorded version of Ending Is the Beginning. Yeah, it's an actual mint album if you ask me. I really enjoy this thing. But fast forward a couple of years and we get to 2017's kind of abomination, which was the self-titled album. And yeah, that album was them attempting to go in a sort of new direction, experimenting with basically a lot of nu metal influence, and it really didn't do them any favours, experimenting with cleans and stuff like that. For all, like, some of the songs were alright and different and kind of standouts from the rest of their discography, I get what they were going for. It just, for me anyway, it was a bad Suicide Silence album. It wasn't a bad, say, nu metal album, it was just a bad Suicide Silence album. That's my personal take on the album. And I mean, Doris, for all its meme quality, sometimes when I'm in the mood, it hits a right spot, I'm not gonna lie, but that's just my personal opinion. But then people kind of lost a lot of taste and a lot of admiration for Suicide Silence. Okay, this is the death of the band, and then things kind of like changed direction after that. They decided, okay, we're going to go back to our deathcore style, and then back in 2020 we have Become the Hunter, which was their last album on Nuclear Blast Records. Now this album, for all it was a really good deathcore album and definitely a return to form. I mean, Two Steps and Love Me to Death are quite highlight tracks on this album for a lot of people, but the title track's definitely one of my favourites on here. But yeah, this album, even though when it came out back then, it still had, and for me anyway, it still had that bitter taste of like, yeah, but you did that atrocity sort of thing. And it kind of like wavered for a lot of people, and me included, but it is still a good album, and I still find this album to be really good for a Suicide Silence album. It kind of has elements of You Can't Stop Me, a bit of The Black Crown in there, for example, and stuff like that, but it wasn't like stupendously heavy, for example. It was just a really solid return to form Suicide Silence album, if you ask me. So if you haven't heard this album, definitely give it a shot. I think it's kind of underrated in amongst their discography. But they announced that they had parted ways from Nuclear Blast and re-signed with Century Media Records, where they'd released The Black Crown, No Time to Bleed, and The Cleansing, and we're going to be releasing a heavy album now, and they were going back to their roots sort of thing. Like, there's a lot of hype around that sort of thing. And I'm not gonna lie, the singles that they dropped leading up to this album were quite interesting, shall we say. I was like, okay, they are going for a more heavier sort of taste for Suicide Silence. Like, it's not as like, it didn't really sound anything like, say, for example, Become the Hunter or You Can't Stop Me. It had a different sort of vibe, going for a more violent atmosphere. So I was quite intrigued and wanted to do a review of this album, you know, when it dropped. So here we are, and let's get on with it. So yeah, it is 12 tracks and runs around 41 minutes in length. And like I said, you get the essence from the singles that they were releasing, that they were going for definitely a more heavier aspect to their overall sound. And this album to me is definitely their most heaviest most written album that they've done to date. Like, since The Cleansing, I would say, because you can tell that they paid a lot more attention to brutality and gone for more intense and more diabolical riffage in their overall sound. Like, if you take like the heavier moments of the likes of Become the Hunter and You Can't Stop Me, and heavier moments from, say, No Time to Bleed, for example, you take those sort of elements and garnish it with the production sounds of The Black Crown, for example, then you get the overall sound that is Remember You Must Die. It's very heavy sound and very crushing and very impactful in the overall sound. Not just from a drum or mix sort of production, but the overall musicianship and the overall tones that they're going for us. Like, this one, in my opinion, definitely is the Suicide Silence tone. Like, you can definitely hear that they're going for that sound that they are pretty well known for over the past, say, 4 albums, with from Become the Hunter all the way back to The Black Crown. It's very, I would say, a very bright and very sharp sort of tone to it. Like, I wouldn't say like this is definitely the beefiest sounding of deathcore albums in 2022. I think this one is definitely a more sharp and more intense sort of feel to it, and more barbaric in an essence. Like, it doesn't feel very thick overall, but the riffs kind of compensate for that, and it makes for a really unique listening experience to it. The best way to describe it, it's a different kind of heavy feel to it with this tone. And for all, personally, to me, I think that the tone overall is one of the how shall I say, the negative thoughts that I feel about this album, because I feel like this album, for all it's got some of the heaviest stuff that we have heard from Suicide Silence in a long fucking time. And I mean a long fucking time. When I say that, I mean like ending is the beginning, for example. That sort of heaviness, and I know that was kind of like a re-recorded version, but imagine that sort of songwriting and heaviness brought forward to 2023, and that's kind of what it feels like songwriting wise. Like, it's very slammy orientated and very old school deathcore, like MySpace sort of deathcore, like the likes of old school Whitechapel, Impending Doom sort of, or even old Suicide Silence to an essence, where it's like very heavy driven, but the overall production kind of like, it holds back the overall sound to the overall album. Like, Eddie's vocals definitely sound a bit more crushing, a bit more menacing on this album, whereas like on previous albums he sounded a lot more insane, should we just say, whereas this one he sounds a little bit more intense and a little bit more grit to his voice. Like, over the past couple of albums, I would say his voice has definitely changed from like his days in All Shall Perish. Like, his tone in that album was on those albums were very signature sort of thing, whereas this sort of tone, it kind of like reminds us in the transition of like Tom Barber in Chelsea Grin versus to him in Lorna Shore or even Darkwood to an essence. The tones are different in both bands, whereas this one, I definitely feel it's a bit more about power and his presence on the overall record as his vocal performance. Like, don't get us wrong, his range is still there. He can still hit those like higher, gnarly sort of like pitched up highs that he does, where he reaches that high range and then just twists, like as if twists it to a new sort of like high range, like his signature Eddie Hamida. He hits those a little bit, like they're not as prominent across this entire album, but his high range is definitely hitting that sweet spot that kind of like complements his lower vocals, because his lower vocals have definitely changed, but he has some really gnarly, disgusting gutturals on here that really set in stone a more heavier atmosphere on this album, like particularly on the songs You Must Die, Capable of Violence and Kill Forever, which are definitely signature songs for me that stand out on this album. The overall guitar tone, as I said, it's very crisp but very chunky. Like there's not the best way I can describe it is there isn't tremendous amounts of gain on the guitar. Like it really gives it a lot of definition in the notes and the clarity of it, but it really like as if there's like a little bit too much clarity for like the slower, more drops in tempo. It really doesn't have as much of an effect as it could have if it had a much more beefier, gainier tone. If you ask me, that's just the way I feel when I listen to this record. And then the bass work as well, like the bass capabilities, like Danny is a very underrated bass player, if you ask me. He's got some really cool ways of like cutting through the mix, especially on this record. Like the bass is so audible. It's quite very present when you listen, no matter what volume, when you're on your higher volume or your lower volume, you can always hear that bass just cutting through like a knife. And his work of like following the guitars just really emanates really well and shows that his capability, should we just say. And then the new drummer, I will say, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but his drum work is absolutely phenomenal. But it does follow suit after Alex's departure. Like their sort of signature style of drumming is kind of like you can tell being an influence here, but it still feels like there's still blast beats all over this record. There's a lot of groove, but I do love the tones of the drum. Like the tone of the drums is probably my highlight of this record, besides the heavy songwriting, which I personally would feel, actually I'll get to that in a second, but the overall drum production sounds really crisp and very natural sounding in its overall production. It doesn't sound overly produced. It doesn't sound like it's been put through like with samples added on it. It just sounds completely natural, and it really works for the overall sound what they're going for. It does match the guitar and bass tone very well. Like it kind of like complements it in a way, but the overall vibe I get from this is I feel like this record, and listening to it, for all it's a solid record and the lyrics are definitely a lot more aggressive in their delivery as well, I feel like these songs would more transition better live, in my personal opinion. Like as a record and a listener, it is pretty good, but I just feel like in a live atmosphere with more chunk come from the amps and the PA, it would sound massively so much bigger and so much thicker, but the overall thinness of the production kind of just takes away from it a little bit. It doesn't make it a shit album by any means or stretch of the imagination. I'd say it's a very solid album and a good return to form for the heavy factors of Suicide Silence, but I think it was just let down a little bit by the production overall sound, personally to me. But it does stand out from the crowd of the deathcore records that we've got now that are sounding really thick and really beefy sounding. To have a record sound like this kind of in the mix kind of just breaks it up. I can kind of get that, and maybe it will feel like a better record as time goes on. I don't know. But personally to me, listening to this album, I think it's a solid release, but it just was a bit... yeah, I was just a bit taken back by the production. That it could have been a lot better, in my personal opinion. So excuse me. And I will say the artwork is pretty amazing as well. I really enjoyed looking at that artwork when they announced it. But for an overall score though, I'm going to give this a solid 6 out of 10. It's a solid album songwriting wise for Suicide Silence, but the production just didn't do much for me. But yeah, what do you think? Let us know in the comments. What do you think of the new Suicide Silence album? And let us know what do you think of their older albums. Maybe I've got a different opinion to use on their older stuff. But yeah, make sure you check out my Riffs for Days playlist on Spotify, link down below. And also make sure to subscribe, more videos are on the way. But yeah, I'll see you until the next video. And remember, stay metal, and I'll see you later.